5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
In 2012, I started working at CBS Radio KMOX down in St. Louis, Missouri. And I had a great time working there for 4 years. And over that time, we transitioned through a lot of different content, a lot of different types of communication. We would have podcasts for the shows. I would work on several different shows as a board operator / producer. And a lot of those shows included sports, it included talk, it included news, it included weekend shows talking about gardening, home improvement, and a bunch of other different things. And so today in this project, I'm going to be utilizing Facebook Live as a different medium compared to traditional radio, and I will be interviewing my father, another Ken Newhouse, in this video today through Facebook Live. Facebook Live wasn't working today, so I'm going to be doing a little bit of a video edit to show you a little bit extra. You'll like that, a little bit extra on this this content communication video. So Facebook Live wasn't working, but behind the scenes you'll get another little extra cut transition for my introduction video. Hope you enjoy it. And so I just wanted to introduce him coming up here. When we get into the content, we will have 2 different segments. Those segments will cover life as a podcaster and then how utilizing new mediums is so beneficial. Well, hi everyone. My name is Ken Newhouse. I am actually interviewing my dad today, who is the other Ken Newhouse. He's Kenneth L. Newhouse. I'm Kenneth E. Newhouse. So there's no junior here.
Yes.
But people always ask me that. It's kind of funny. But they're like, aren't you Ken Jr.? I'm like, no, we have a different middle name. My mom gave me that middle name, I believe, if that was right. Evan?
Yes.
Okay. Now, today we're going to be doing a couple different segments. I'm going to be interviewing him. The first segment is titled Life of a Podcaster, and the second one is titled Utilizing New Mediums for Podcasting. So I have a few questions for him today. Each segment's about 10 to 12 minutes.
Sure.
And so the first segment, I want to talk about your life as a podcaster. I know growing up, I loved radio. I loved listening to radio. Loved listening to Cardinals broadcasts on KMOX, Blues, Chris Kerber. I remember we used to listen to those just driving along the road. You remember the outreach of KMOX.
Huge.
Yes.
Multiple states.
Yeah, we could hear it in Tennessee. We could hear it in Illinois. We could hear it a bunch of different other places we traveled. And that's really the focus of what I'm doing here with this content communication project. And so, but I want to go to your life as a podcaster. So, as you recall, when I worked at KMOX from 2012 to 2016, I had a podcast with my friend, little short dude, Lloyd Sloan. You remember him with the glasses.
Yeah.
Big political show we were doing. It was called Upper Left USA Radio.
Yeah.
Not liberal politics.
Not liberal.
Not liberal politics, but it was a fun time. But you, on the other hand, have transitioned over to a podcast of your own, and it's called the Get Clients Now podcast.
Yes.
And so I want to talk about quickly, what is the brief history of your podcast with Get Clients Now? How did that change over time? And where did you first begin with that?
Well, I first began while I was in practice as a chiropractor. I had a paid spot, which was a radio show I did in Rolla, Missouri. Actually just talked about that on my last episode, the most recent episode I was editing before you got here today to the studio. But did that for about 6 months, once a week. And I had so much fun doing it that somewhere down the road, I decided to do a podcast. And the way the podcast came about was that I had spoken at the local Chamber of Commerce, and several of the people at the chamber asked me if I would be interested in doing like a training with them, like a webinar. So I did, and one thing led to another, and somebody suggested that I do a podcast. I said, I don't have time for a podcast, and it stuck with me. I thought about it. It wasn't long before I came to the realization that I thought I wanted to do a podcast. But before I made the decision to do the podcast, I didn't know if it was going to work or not. I made 2 distinct choices. Number one, I would never pay to run Facebook ads or any other promotion. I wanted to see if I could build this organically because I did have a following, although it was relatively small with the existing clients that I had at the time. And number 2, I would commit to doing it for 1 year, a minimum of 1 show a week for 1 year, no matter what my results were, and I would not miss a show. And so over the last 3 years and 4 months, I've only missed 1 show, and that was during the week of Christmas last year, but I've consistently done that over time, and now I'm up to episode 364 will be my next episode. I've got several other interviews already recorded, some of the most recognized people in marketing and entrepreneurship and in sales. Certainly didn't have that much luck in the beginning, but that's where we are now. We went from virtually no listeners, and if I have time for just one more comment,
Sure.
when I first started the podcast, and I think it was kind of funny, I was so stressed, I was so uptight because I had this false belief that I would have like the whole world will be listening to my show. And the beautiful and talented Lisa, who's my wife, was actually doing the show with me. She sat in one part of the house in the closet because I wanted to knock down the noise. And I sat in another part of the house, and I was so stressed and so uptight. Mind you, I've done live seminars, I've done tons of training before, webinars, things like that, but this was different. It was terrifying. Now I'm in a professionally designed studio. Things are a lot different. Talk with and interview some of the most recognized names throughout the world, and I love it. It's so much fun. I absolutely love what I'm doing. There's no stress. It's just a lot of fun now. I actually love it more than being a chiropractor. I think I really do.
It was kind of funny. When I was over at KMOX and running the Upper Left USA radio podcast, I had the benefit of working in a professional studio.
Yeah.
But the kicker is that at the same time I had to be monitoring the radio station. I'd be doing my broadcast. Looking back on it now, I probably shouldn't have, but I would be doing my recording when I was working the 7 to midnight shift, and the two stations that I was monitoring, KYKYFM and KEZK, 1025 and
Yes.
Y98.
Yep.
Those were running automatically, and I, as a board operator, didn't have to go on air because everything was pre-recorded from that 7 to midnight. So I was back in the other studio. I could hear in my headphones to make sure that the station wasn't going off air. It never did, luckily. But I want to talk about how podcasting has either helped or, probably has helped your business.
That's why I'm still doing it after three years.
Exactly. But going back, I remember watching you. Was it on infomercials that you had when
I
you were a
spent
chiropractor?
a ton of money on infomercials. Yeah.
I remember that. I think Channel 5 maybe.
Cable television. Well, it was cable, mostly cable, because
Okay.
cable was less expensive than
Gotcha.
network. But for every dollar I spent on infomercials that ran overnight, I would make back $30.
What do you think has been more effective, though, podcasting for your business today or infomercials back then? The technology has really changed in the last 20 years. So, what?
Well, there's a
What do
couple
you
different ways to look at that. If you look at how much money I made over time, because my podcast is relatively new. Yes, I've been doing this for 3 years, but seriously, dedicated, because I even started another podcast with a dentist client of mine, and then this was right before COVID. That everything kind of fell apart with that, so I stopped that and have really dedicated myself to this. But I will say that I made millions of dollars over, 4 or 5 years using infomercials to drive new patients into the practice. But I had a whole marketing system set up. People would call in from watching the infomercial to request a free video, which was on VHS tape.
Mm-hmm.
Bought 1,000 of those the first time I bought them. Yeah, $4 a piece, but they worked. And then I would send out a 16-page, quote-unquote, free report, which was a sales letter to get people into my office, and it was very effective at helping me get very highly qualified, targeted new patient prospects into my practice. This is entirely different because there are literally the competition. I didn't have any competition as a chiropractor, even though there are more chiropractors per capita in St. Louis than anywhere else on the planet. The difference
It's
being,
insane. There's a lot of them around here.
the difference being is that I was able to niche my practice and be seen as completely and utterly different than everyone else.
Yeah.
Utterly different. On the internet now, I've got to compete against not only 750,000 podcasters, I have to compete against everybody who's on YouTube, everybody who's got a blog, every social media platform. So there's much more competition. I will say this. My average new patient was probably worth $10,000 to $15,000 to me as a chiropractor over their lifetime. My average new client that I've acquired through podcasting is right about $40,000.
Okay.
So there's a big difference in that. As far as the business goes, I don't know. I made a lot more money as a chiropractor,
Yeah.
but my overhead, because of all the employees, I had a radiographic tech, an office manager, chiropractic assistants, malpractice insurance. I don't have any of that now. So while the overhead expenditure is greatly different, I don't make as much money, but I get to keep a lot more what I make. So,
Well, for this first segment, I just had a couple more questions for Dr. Newhouse here.
sure.
we've been talking a lot about podcasting and the evolution of technology over the last 20 years or so.
Yeah.
But I want to ask, I know how I've prepared for shows in the past, but as a person who does it every single week and every day you're working on podcasts, you're always texting our group chat for the family, and you're like, hey, I got to do this interview today. I can't really talk right now. I'm busy.
Yeah, don't call unless it's an emergency.
Exactly. Now, I mean, it's part of your business. It's your job, and that's what you're doing for work. And tell me two things here. What do you do briefly preparing for your show every time you have a new episode? And secondly, what are some changes that you've made since your first episode compared to 364/365, which you're working on right now?
Well, the preparation portion of your question, what I do now is first I determine what my audience wants, the members that Get Clients Now Nation. So those are my fans. This month we're going to pass 100,000 downloads in 2020, which is pretty awesome.
It's incredible.
Yeah, I'm stoked. But I want to know, see, a podcast, the success of a podcast first and foremost is based on the fact that you have listeners. That's how you get people who want to spend ad revenue with you and run commercials on your show, which I made a decision when I first started that I would never run commercials. But what I do now to prepare is first I decide what would my audience really love to hear most. What are they really ravenous to devour? What information or what people, what personality can I bring them? Then there's a process I go through of reaching out to contact that person. And then once I contact that person and get the show booked, then that's when the real work begins, because virtually all these people have written a book. Not all of them, but virtually all of them have written a book, or they've got a training course or something that I personally have to go through. And I'm shocked because dozens and dozens of people that I've talked to have told me that the host rarely reads their book. Well, I read 2 to 3 books a week, which I can't say that I've always done that, but over the last 15 years, I've read probably close to 12 to 1,500 books. So I have to read their book. Then over the last 2 months, I've developed a super cool way to question my guests. And I stumbled upon this by watching a show called Meat Eater, which is a hunting program on TV. But I liked his show because he told stories. So in interviewing all these people who are world experts on storytelling for business, using storytelling or aspects or elements of story to sell more stuff, to be more effective in all walks of life, especially in business, I came up with and used, and it's much more complicated than this, but I used the hero's journey in my questioning structure. So I read the content of their book and then base my questions so that I can take my listeners through the journey of where they are now in their business, the struggles they're going through, the resistance to change. A mentor comes on the scene, gets them to see that they need to change. They go through a change, then they have a struggle, they don't succeed, then they go from there to success. I take them through that whole process. So by listening to the show, they're without really understanding that they're going through this process, I'm literally taking them subconsciously through the same process they would go through in watching a movie, through questioning.
Interesting.
One of the other things that I do is I go back, in addition to that, is that I tell a second story. So I'm telling 2 stories, a parallel story, where I go in and narrate in a totally different tone of voice, different style than when you and I are like in the middle of a dialogue right now.
Definitely.
It's just like a narrative voice that comes in, and I tell a parallel story with that. So there are 2 simultaneous stories going on. My podcast downloads have literally doubled over the last 2 months, which is huge.
Yeah.
So I really think I'm onto something, and I've worked really hard on it. How it was when it was different was Lisa and I would just talk about a subject, or I would talk about a subject, not very, certainly not very sophisticated at all, much more stressful. I did at the time still read the books that I was going to be talking about or the subject. I usually talked about subjects that I was well versed in, like direct marketing copywriting, sales, persuasion, things like that. Wasn't an expert on podcasting. Now I'm an expert on podcasting. So
I think he's an expert on podcasting because I bought him a really fantastic book. We'll talk about that after this break. Stick around, because during this break, I'm going to be breaking down a behind-the-scenes look at how to use Adobe Audition for podcasting and also some of the different technology for podcasting purposes. Stick around. Welcome back. And right now we're doing a screen recording on, what'd you say, Camtasia?
yeah, Camtasia Studio.
Camtasia Studio. Pretty cool. Pretty cool technology here. So what I have open is Adobe Audition. When I first started using Adobe Audition, it was way, way back when I was an intern at the Big 550 KTRS in St. Louis. And I had a really fun time using Adobe Audition. It was really cool. Actually, we're not opening a new file. We are opening an old file. I have a couple different commercials that I used to play when I was at my first college, Lindenwood University, and it was really cool. I was able to record a few different spots that they allowed me to do in studio. Got my dad walking behind me here, it's fine. Let's see what we got here. First one I'm going to be opening right here. So you got all the different audio sounds right here. And we're going to be taking a look real quick at this Huff Orthodontics commercial that I used.
Are you looking for a new orthodontist? Well, if you are, Huff Orthodontics is the right place for you. With two offices in the St. Louis and St. Charles area, Huff Orthodontics offers an ideal location for optimal patient care. If you want your family to leave with a smile, come to the best family-oriented orthodontist in the greater St. Louis region. You can reach Dr. Huff today at 636-391-1959. That's 636-391-1959. Huff Orthodontics, creating smiles, changing lives.
So,
Are you looking for a new
it keeps
orthodontist?
playing. Hold on, I
Well,
gotta stop
if you
that. So, Dr. Previtt probably knows, since he is a fantastic communication professor. Now, I loved mass communication. This was my undergrad. And working with Adobe Audition, there were a couple times during this commercial that I peaked, but you gotta pay attention. So, this beginning segment right here, this first, you gotta zoom in, this first probably quarter of a second right here, you got to make sure you have a nice little introduction. So it's not just like, bam, right in your face. You got to have a little bit of an introduction, of a little bit of silence right there to make sure that the audio sounds decent. And moving through here, you can take a look at some of these other little stops. Okay, so this little segment right here, I end and then I take a breath. But I cut out the breath so it sounds a little bit better with transitioning throughout this Adobe Audition file. So we'll keep going through here. You see it here. Here's another little break. I probably could have shortened that a little bit, but honestly, after editing, it didn't sound the best. So in traditional radio, when we were broadcasting, especially in my podcast too, when I was doing Upper Left USA Radio, I would have 30-second spots roughly to 1 minute. And I tried to avoid the 1 minute spots because they just seemed a little bit too long and they dragged on. I love 30-second traditional spots. When I was over at KMOX, we had to try to tie in these commercial breaks, and they didn't have to be even, but the commercials had to be between 29.5 to 30.5 seconds, just so we could match things up fairly well with a 1 hour time frame for each show. Now, this is a behind-the-scenes look, just a little bit of what we were doing with Adobe Audition. You got our traditional microphone here. I hope you've enjoyed the brief, very brief, introduction to Adobe Audition, but this is just some of the behind-the-scenes work that us in podcasting life and radio life had to do. Well, welcome back to segment 2, our final segment today of this super awesome content communication interview. Now, we talked a little bit about life of a podcaster, especially for Dr. Newhouse here in the first segment. And the second segment is going to be focusing on utilizing new mediums. So I want to ask, the first question is, what are your thoughts about using live video during a podcast?
Live streaming, I'm getting ready to start doing it. I just interviewed T. Davis, who wrote the Dummies Guide to Podcasting. Podcasting for Dummies is the name of the book, but he also wrote Twitch for Dummies, and he also wrote Discord for Dummies. And Twitch is a video game platform which is now being used by businesses of all manner and large corporate entities where it's live streaming. And so the whole concept of live streaming and being live, a little frightening at first. Sound quality you can't go in and do any post-production edits or anything like that, and so that's henceforth why I bought the new Rode microphone or Shure microphone today. But definitely want to do it. Again, you'll have to get over the mental hurdle of, will I have anybody watching? I got a ton of listeners, but that's a different platform entirely because they can listen whenever they want.
Exactly.
Live streaming, whether it's Facebook or one of these other platforms, people have to be in a certain place, whether it's on their smartphone or wherever they can watch it at a given time. So it's a lot harder to pull an audience.
During my time at KMOX, everyone, they never really utilized Facebook Live. They had a great social media presence on Facebook. And Twitter. They had Periscope and a bunch of other things, but they never really utilized live streaming for behind-the-scenes looks at broadcasting. And when you got really popular shows, when KMOX is ranking top 5 every single month, they're the only AM radio station in St. Louis, in the St. Louis radio market, to rank in the top 15 for total station listenership. They get, I guess, every month roughly between a 5 and 6 share of listenership. When I was there back in 2012 to 2016, it was about 8 to 9. So it's dropped a little bit because there's been more people coming in and listening to the radio stations, that are actually different radio stations in general. But they've done a really good job keeping listeners, but how do they expand those listeners? And I think utilizing video such as Facebook Live or another like Twitter broadcasts where they can go live, or Periscope, they can use one of those new mediums to attract their unconventional listener to a behind the scenes look at how, as we saw during the commercial break, how things operate behind the scenes. Now, what do you think are some benefits of live video, and what are some downsides of live video when we do a podcast?
Well, I mean, the move for authenticity is pretty prolific now within all forms of media.
Yeah.
So it's, with live streaming, I mean, it's raw.
Yeah.
It is what it is. So that's, you live by the sword, you can die by the sword. And so as an example, when I interviewed T, I asked him a question, and I won't go into it, but he gave me an answer that literally shocked me. It didn't offend me, but it just was shocking to me, someone of his stature. And then about a minute later, he came back and said, we were on to another topic, and he said, hey, that last part, can we just cut that out? I'm like, yeah, no problem. And he said, had we been live streaming, I probably wouldn't have gone into all that. And so, and he did go on to tell me, I don't have any experience live streaming at this point, other than just with clients or members. I've done that, but like on a large scale, like we're planning on doing. But some of the things that he told me is that with live streaming, a couple of times he has said things that, you can't take back.
Yeah.
So you might say something you think is funny, but you have to be sensitive to the fact that we have a lot of, I won't call them maniacs, but a lot of people who are choosing to be sensitive, a lot of people who believe that their voice needs to be heard above everyone else's. And so if they have something to say, they don't like what you say, they're going to badmouth you online or whatever. So you have to be, I won't say politically correct, because I refuse to be forced into that pigeonhole, but at least for me. But you have to be careful of what you say. But again, there's that, hey, this is what really goes on behind the scenes, and I think there's an appeal to that. So it could be a double-edged sword. You just have to, use it prudently.
As we've seen, we're not really going to get into politics here, but
Not at all.
it was kind of funny. I was watching President Trump's speech a couple weeks ago. At times, I thought he was really funny with the camera, and then you get people on the left saying, oh, he meant this and this and this, when honestly, I don't believe he did. And then yesterday, Vice President Biden, who's running against President Trump, said 120 million people have died from COVID. People misspeak.
Yeah, they misspeak.
And he misspoke, and
Yeah.
I don't believe he did that on purpose. And so things happen. So people were on the right were being all nasty towards him and be like, oh, look what he said and this and that.
That's unfortunately the world of politics.
Yeah, it is the world of politics, and I've been a part of that world of politics. I've experienced that nastiness, and you've understood what I've gone through with that, especially with some of my old opponents and some of the stuff I've dealt with. But sticking with media, Facebook Live, different sorts of mediums coming in for podcasting and traditional radio, I think are really beneficial for the viewer, not the viewer, but the listener, to get a behind-the-scenes look at.
Well, live streaming is the viewer.
Exactly. But it's someone different. It's not your typical consumer when you dial in on the radio, or
Right.
when you go back and play a podcast. You actually get to genuinely see the live person talking
Absolutely.
at that time. And that's what I think is beneficial. So I just want to thank you for your time today.
Oh, you're welcome.
Yes, he's my dad. So Ken E. It's kind of funny. My parents gave me Ken as my initials, if you never knew that. Kenneth Evan Newhouse. So it's kind of fun to listen to that. Now, thank you for your time today. I appreciate it again. I really hope you guys enjoy this video with COM 835.